When I was first asked to deliver a chapel talk in a digital format, my immediate and emphatic response was no. And if you've ever witnessed me incompetently navigate the world of technology, well, you may understand my initial response. But yet, in spite of that initial no, I am here anyway. Why? Well, in part because now I can practice what I preach. That is to say, I can confront, not hide from, shirk. I can confront the unknown, the purpose of this talk. A talk on the nature of fear, as understood primarily by way of our mortality, and how and why we must overcome it. We've all been thrust into the unknown recently, for better or for worse. And I mean that in a complicated way. As we all know, there are many good reasons or outcomes to be expected due to our quarantined lives, but many bad ones too. What I mean by that last point is that while we may be saving lives clearly, many livelihoods are being destroyed, and many opportunities clearly missed, ones we will never maybe even know about or appreciate fully. And it takes a nuanced approach to understand the good from the overblown hysteria. It takes a sophisticated outlook to understand the tension that exists between the value of life in general versus the value of living well. More on that later. From toilet paper wars to Michelangelo, you've seen it here first. Now, there are two very basic and fundamental responses to an encounter with the unknown. And those responses, I should note, are ancient, biologically speaking. And by that I mean, to some extent, hardwired. Man in God's image. That is to say, your personality is an important determinant in your response, but so are your values, informed by your philosophical or religious views, and your experiences, and as a corollary to that, memory. When it comes to the unknown, then, the responses are fear, Michelangelo again, Last Judgment, same room as the Sistine Chapel, in fact. If one interprets the unknown as a threat, or hope, if one interprets the unknown as an opportunity. If the threat is novel enough or thoroughly unexpected, the first step is to freeze. Think of a deer in headlights. If the unknown seems promising, we draw ourselves near and investigate. If it is fearful, fight or flight is the name of the game. Now, every story ever told, indeed the story of mankind itself, is nothing more than having the courage to confront, to fight, to master the unknown and take a potential threat and turn it into something useful. By useful, I mean learning something, and that may be about yourself, so that you can confront that challenge more easily next time or help someone else in a similar situation. If you've ever seen the depiction of the hero Hercules wearing a protective skin of the self-same Nemean lion that he slayed, you understand this concept. What before was a threat, overcome and faced, becomes a form of protection. To meet that initial threat takes courage, virtue. Right now, most of us are being safe, as those with more knowledge or expertise, think scientists and those in the medical profession, or bravery, think first responders, or necessary function, think farmers, truck drivers, cashiers, grocery store workers, cooks, the people who maintain the power grid, while they carry the real burden of meeting a biological threat, like Hercules did for those in his community. There was an outstanding article in the New Yorker a few weeks ago by Peter Sheldall, the magazine's art critic, writing on his reassessment of the 17th century painter of the Spanish Golden Age, Velázquez. He wrote on how he's able to appreciate his work more fully, having become more aware of his own mortality via an ongoing bout with cancer and humanity's bout with COVID. Such an awareness is crucially important for all of us to gain. Crucially, incidentally, is derived from the Latin word crux, meaning cross. And this is Michelangelo again. He seemed to understand something about these things. To go beyond Sheldall, an awareness of one's mortality does far more than allow us to appreciate great art more fully. It, in fact, brings us closer to what we are as a species, to our history as a species, and gives us gives our lives more value and meaning. Now, you don't need to go far into the past to realize the ubiquity of causes of early death. Among them, infant mortality, poverty, disease, infection, war, death in childbirth, and so on. It is not as if such threats do not still exist. In an ordinary day in the United States, that's pre-COVID, on average, 7,700 people die per day. Many from things that are avoidable, like car crashes and disease. Now, in spite of that staggering number, in the modern world, and I mean just over the last 70 years even, we have learned to significantly minimize early death. In 1950, for example, global infant mortality was at 22.5%, which meant if you had 5 children, statistically, you would expect one to pass away in the first 2 years. Now, in 2015 is the most recent data, 4.5% and less than 1% in the United States. So we've made incredible strides as a species in respect to our biological relationship to death. Science and medicine have been true panaceas. But what about our spiritual relationship to death? And this is where I want to delve a little further into that earlier distinction I made between the value of a life and the value of a life lived well. Our biological existence is a sort of sine qua non. Without it, it is not possible to live at all, and therefore not possible to live well. But I would also argue, however, that it is not worth living in the first place if it's not possible to live well. Most profoundly put by this man, in my opinion. That's Socrates, and that painting hangs in the hall of my home. The existential pangs many of you are likely feeling right now are a direct result of the boredom and lonely isolation of, well, an excessively safe environment, and one characterized by mortal fear in addition, and one where so many of the things that give our lives purpose and meaning, chief among them, our connection to one another and the roles we play in our social community, are gone. I see you, Janard. Like Sheldall, it is crucially important to be aware of the essential fragility of our biological existences. Not to have a morbid obsession with it, but certainly a keen and clear awareness of it. The finitude of life, after all, is oddly what gives life its meaning in the first place. In purely economic terms, value arises directly out of scarcity. Take anything you've ever enjoyed, and it would instantly lose its appeal if it never ended. A championship hockey game that was played literally forever. We are a goal-directed species. That's much of the appeal of sports, in fact, scoring goals, setting goals, aiming at something finite, and bringing it to a completed end. Human beings are oddities in a biological sense, however, in that we do things, take Michelangelo, that transcend our mortal and material existences. While I praised the sciences earlier, I have some healthy condemnation as well. And it is in the form of a criticism of a materialistic worldview, that there is somehow nothing different between me or you and a rock. Some atoms, that's all we are. And on a certain level, that is obviously true. But that which is alive and better thinking, conscious, with a will, which exhibits goal-directed behavior, that is interpreted as conveying and creating meaning, well, that sort of material, you and me, has a spiritual existence as well, that is just as real, more real perhaps, than the collection of atoms that makes us up. Our ideas, the people we touch in our lives, our literature and monuments and institutions, technology we have developed as a species to preserve from death our ideas and values, take on an existence for us that extends far beyond the grave and the mere material. That hockey championship, its material existence is over, for sure, but not its spiritual existence, our memory of it and record of it. We at the Hill, in fact, are part of one of those timeless ideas, that which was conceived by one Matthew Meggs. We are all part of a community that's living, despite our distance, that will remain and continue once we are all done being safe, and indeed continue beyond us ourselves. So in the meantime, consider an idea familiar to all of us, that from St. Paul, of whatsoever things are true. Words, which I wish you could see and consider, in fact, as I delivered this talk, that right there behind the choir. Watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit you like men. Be strong, and I'll add, be brave too, Hill. See you soon.